Try a small exercise. Think back over the last week and try and name 3 good things that happened to you. Take a moment. No hurry. Now try and name 3 bad things. Most people doing this honestly will find the second list comes faster than the first. Good things require some retrieval. The bad things are always more available. They sit closer to the surface. That asymmetry is not a personality trait. It's not a sign that your week was unusually difficult. It's a feature of how the human brain processes information and has been measured carefully across decades of research. Negative events register more strongly, persist longer in memory, and shape behavior more powerfully than positive events of equivalent magnitude. The technical name for this is the negativity bias. It's one of the most reliable findings in cognitive science. On Sunday, Cole and I had a conversation about negative biases. Today, we want to look at one specific reason these systems work as well as they do. Because the variable reward mechanism is half the story. The other half is what your brain is biased to attend to in the first place. And the answer, demonstrably, is whatever feels bad. So the question for this digest is straightforward. Why does bad weigh heavier than good? What is happening neurologically? And what does that mean for living inside an information environment that has figured out how to monetize the answer on your behalf?
Welcome to Neuroscience Digest, powered by my BrainWise coach. I'm Cole Bastian.
And I'm Phil Dixon.
And today's digest is on the negativity bias. We'll cover what it is, where it comes from an evolutionary perspective, and what's happening in the brain, and how bias interacts with the information environment that we covered in previous episodes. This is, of course, our digest version, which is a little shorter and more research-founded than our typical conversation on Sunday. And if this show helps you think differently about your brain, please leave us a 5-star rating and review wherever it is you get your podcasts. Like, comment, share, and subscribe on all our social platforms, and you can find us everywhere at My BrainWise Coach. So, Phil, let's start with the research finding. There's a paper by Roy Baumeister and his colleagues from 2001 with what is, I think, my favorite title in social psychology: Bad is Stronger Than Good. Can you walk us through what they actually found?
I certainly can, and that's actually a great paper, and it's very accessible. If anybody wants to, we can provide information for it. It's a review paper, and it's a good starting point, because rather than reporting one experiment, Baumeister and his colleagues synthesized findings across an enormous range of domains: relationships, learning, emotional, neuroprocessing, social judgment, language. And what they document is that nearly every domain that was studied, negative events have a larger psychological impact than positive events of equivalent magnitude. So therefore, losses hurt roughly twice as much as gains feel good. That's Kahneman and Tversky's loss aversion finding, which sits inside this whole broader pattern. A single critical comment outweighs several pieces of positive feedback. In fact, John Gottman actually says it's as high as 5-1. One bad interaction can damage a relationship more than several good ones can repair it. The symmetry shows up almost everywhere we know how to measure it.
It's not that positive information is ignored, it's that it's weighted differently.
You've put it perfectly. That's the precise framing. The brain attends to both, but it processes negative information faster, in more detail, and with more durability. Ito and Cacioppo did some EEG work in 1998 on this. They showed participants images of equivalent arousal, but different valence. What we mean by valence is equally intense, pleasant, and unpleasant pictures. The brain's electrical response, measured at the scalp, was reliably larger for the negative images. The difference was in the late positive potential, which is associated with attentional engagement. The brain was neurologically paying more attention to the bad.
Rozin and Royzman, in a paper from the same year as Baumeister's, characterized this with more precision, perhaps. They argue the negativity bias has 4 distinct features.
Absolutely. Negative potency, meaning negative events are stronger. Steeper negative gradients, meaning negative events grow in salience faster as they approach. Negative dominance, which is the finding that combinations of positive and negative are evaluated as more negative than the sum of their parts. And negativity contagion, the asymmetry that a small amount of negative contaminates a large amount of positive much more readily than the reverse. The single hair in the soup, the drop of sewage in the wine, that's a revolting thought. We don't have a comparable phrase for the reverse because the reverse doesn't really happen. A drop of wine in the sewage produces sewage.
BrainWise friends, that example is worth sitting with for just a moment. There is no symmetric version. The brain doesn't treat purity and contamination as equivalent categories. Contamination dominates, and once you notice the pattern, you start to see it in how people process feedback, conflict, and reputation. One bad review carries more weight than 10 good ones, not because the person is being irrational, but because the system was built that way. And Phil, the evolutionary explanation for this has become almost a cliche to some degree. Our ancestors who paid more attention to threats survived. The ones who didn't, perhaps didn't reproduce or didn't survive. And I want to make sure that we say something more rigorous than that because the cliche version flattens what is actually a fairly precise argument.
It does flatten it, and the precision matters. The argument is about the cost of that asymmetry. A positive event in the ancestral environment gave you something useful: food, shelter, a mate, an alliance. Missing one was bad but recoverable. A negative event, a predator, a poisoning, a hostile group, could end your reproductive lineage entirely. The two error types are not symmetric. Missing a good thing costs you a benefit. Missing a bad thing costs you everything. Under these evolutionary conditions, a brain overweights bad relative to good is making a rational trade. A few false alarms about threats are cheap. One missed real threat is catastrophic. Natural selection doesn't optimize for accuracy. It optimizes for this asymmetric cost structure. The brain you have was tuned by an environment in which false negatives on threat detection were lethal.
And Joseph LeDoux's work on the amygdala fits in here nicely. The architecture of the brain reflects the priority.
It does. LeDoux shows that there are essentially two routes for sensory information about potential threat. One route runs through the cortex for full evaluation. That's the slow route. The other runs through the thalamus directly to the amygdala. That's the fast route. The fast route gets a degraded version of the information, but gets it sooner. And it can initiate a defensive response before the cortex is finished even noticing or interpreting what's been seen. The architecture privileges threat detection at the level of wiring. This also comes out in Kahneman's System 1 and System 2.
There's a further wrinkle, which is that the developmental evidence shows that this bias is not learned through experience. Veitch, Grossman, and Woodard published a review in 2008 on the developmental literature, and the bias is detectable in infants well before they have the experience that would have taught it to them.
Which is what we'd expect if it's an evolved feature rather than a cultural acquisition. The brain arrives prepared to weight negative information more heavily. The environment doesn't have to install the bias, it only has to use it.
And that's the move I want to make next, because the contemporary point isn't that the bias is wrong, it's that the environment has changed faster than the brain. The bias is doing what it was designed to do. The conditions it was designed for are not the conditions that we necessarily live in. And so, Phil, we've talked about before, variable reward design as the engine of modern engagement. The negativity bias is the other half of that machine, and the empirical evidence on this is actually quite recent and quite clean.
It's very clean. And the clearest study I'd point us to is Robertson and colleagues, and it was in Nature Human Behavior in 2023, recent study. They analyzed click-through rates on news headlines at scale, millions of impressions across a major aggregator. And what they found was that each additional negative word in a headline increased the click-through rate by roughly 2.3%. Each additional positive word decreased it by 1%. 2.3 increase, 1% decrease. Now, it sounds small, but it's not subtle. It's a measurable, replicable engineering relationship. Bad headlines get clicked more. Editors who optimize for engagement optimize for negativity. In fact, whether they intend to or not.
There's earlier work on social diffusion that shows the same pattern in sharing behavior.
Yeah, Brady and colleagues published an article in 2017. They analyzed 500,000 tweets on politically contested topics. Pretty important stuff. Each moral, emotional word in a tweet increased its diffusion within the user's network by roughly 20%. The effect was contained mostly within ideological groups, which is its own important finding, but the diffusion driver was clear. Outrage spreads. Equanimity doesn't. The architecture of social platforms, algorithmic amplification of high engagement content, selects for exactly the kind of content the negativity bias attends to.
Variable reward mechanism we've described previously tells you why people stay engaged with those feeds. The negativity bias tells you why the content the algorithm surfaces is what it is. The system is not surfacing accurate information or even popular information. It is surfacing content that triggers the part of the brain built to attend to threat. And it is doing so because that content produces the most measurable engagement.
There's another trick. There's a feedback loop here that's worth naming explicitly. The platform's algorithm learns from its user's behavior. User behavior, on average, reflects the negativity bias. So the algorithm increasingly surfaces negative contents because the negative content is what users engage with. The user experiences this as the world becoming worse because their information environment is concentrating negative signals at a rate that doesn't reflect base rates in the actual world. The world hasn't necessarily gotten worse. Their feed is showing that it has.
In BrainWise, friends, this is one of the most important distinctions that we can make in this digest. The mood of your information feed or your social media feed is not the mood of the world. The feed has been algorithmically tuned to your brain's bias. The world has not. So, Phil, let's leave with two things for, our BrainWise friends to take away from this particular conversation today.
Well, the first is the mechanism. The brain weights bad more heavily than good because in the environment that built it, that asymmetry kept you alive. The bias isn't a flaw, it's not bad. It was an adaptation. The trouble is that an environment now exists which has been engineered deliberately to feed that adaptation a steady diet of triggers that it was never built to handle. And the result is something between exhaustion and just a distorted view of the world. The second thing is that the move is the same one we offered on a previous session. You will not out-discipline this bias. You can't control it. It's older and faster than any discipline you can bring. What you can do is change what reaches you. Curate the feeds. Remove the sources that traffic in outrage as a business model. Notice those inputs leave you feeling more accurate about the world and which leave you feeling more activated about it. Those are different. And the activated feeling, however righteous it can feel, is most often the bias being fed rather than reality being reported accurately.
The practical move I'd offer this week is what I'd call a feed audit. Pick one source you check regularly, a news app, a social platform, or a particular account or newsletter. Spend 10 minutes looking at the last 20 things it surfaced to you. Ask this question: did this make me more accurate about the world, or did it just make me feel something? Most of the time, the honest answer is the second. Once you have that data, you have a decision to make. In previous episodes, we've said environment beats willpower. The same is true here. You cannot reason your way out of negativity bias, but you can change the room in which you're operating in.
So stay curious about your own mind. Ask those things that Cole just suggested. Your mind is genuinely one of the most interesting things you're ever going to explore.
As always, thank you for spending time with us today, BrainWise friends. And until next time, stay curious, stay compassionate, and always stay BrainWise.